Martha Bennett had always been the epitome of grace and elegance, the kind of woman who effortlessly commanded respect and admiration from those around her. At 42 years old, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had long ago mastered the art of presenting a perfect facade. But her life in the affluent suburbs of Connecticut was a carefully constructed image of success and contentment. Martha was married to Richard Bennett, a man whose professional success as a corporate lawyer had afforded them a life of luxury and comfort. They lived in a sprawling colonial-style house on a quiet, tree-lined street where the neighbors exchanged polite smiles, but rarely more. Richard was 45, a man of impeccable taste and a sharp intellect. He was tall, with a commanding presence, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits that spoke of his wealth and status. His hair was beginning to gray at the temples, adding a distinguished air to his otherwise youthful appearance. Richard's career had always been his priority, and while he provided well for his family, he was often emotionally distant, preoccupied with work and the pursuit of further success. The long hours he spent at the office and on business trips had created a chasm in his marriage that he either didn't notice or chose to ignore. Martha had married Richard when she was 24, fresh out of college where she had studied art history. She had dreams of working in a museum or gallery, but those ambitions quickly faded as she settled into the role of a corporate wife. Over the years, Martha had become accustomed to the lifestyle that Richard's success provided: charity galas, country club memberships, and vacations in exotic locations. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, Martha felt a growing sense of dissatisfaction. The spark that had once existed between her and Richard had long since dimmed, replaced by a routine that left her feeling lonely and unfulfilled. Their only child, Lily, was now 17 and about to enter her senior year of high school. Lily was a bright and independent young woman, more interested in her studies and social life than in spending time at home. She had inherited her mother's grace and her father's intellect, making her a popular and well-rounded student. Martha adored her daughter, but as Lily grew older and more independent, Martha found herself with more time on her hands and fewer distractions from the emptiness that had settled into her marriage. It was during this time of growing restlessness that Martha's attention began to wander. She often found herself daydreaming about the life she could have had, the passions she had never pursued, and the love she felt she was missing. She would spend hours in her garden or sitting by the large bay window in her living room, sipping tea and watching the world go by, lost in her thoughts. Next door to the Bennetts lived the Thompson family. John and Margaret Thompson were friendly neighbors, though not particularly close to the Bennetts. John was a retired engineer, and Margaret was a homemaker. They had 2 children, but it was their son, Alex, who would soon come to play a significant role in Martha's life. Alex Thompson was 22 years old, recently graduated from a state university with a degree in business administration. He was tall, athletic, and had an easy charm that made him popular with both his peers and adults. His short brown hair, warm hazel eyes, and boyish smile gave him an air of youthful exuberance that was both endearing and slightly mischievous. After graduating, Alex had moved back home while he figured out his next steps, which included looking for a job and saving money before eventually moving out on his own. Alex had always been close to his parents, particularly his mother, Margaret, who doted on him. He was the kind of son who would help around the house without being asked, mowing the lawn, fixing things that needed repair, and running errands for his parents. His father, John, was proud of him and often spoke highly of Alex's potential and bright future. Martha had known Alex since he was a teenager, but their interactions had always been polite and superficial, exchanging pleasantries at neighborhood gatherings or the occasional wave across the driveway. However, with Alex now living back at home and often outside working on his car or helping his parents, Martha began to notice him more. At first, it was just a casual observation, a recognition of how much he had grown and changed from the boy she remembered. But soon, those observations became more frequent, and she found herself looking for excuses to be outside whenever Alex was around. Their first real conversation occurred one sunny afternoon in early summer. Martha was in her garden, tending to her roses, when Alex came over to compliment her on the flowers. He mentioned how much his mother admired Martha's garden and asked for advice on helping his parents with theirs. They chatted for a while about gardening, with Alex showing a surprising interest in the subject. Martha found herself enjoying the conversation more than she had expected. Alex was engaging, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. After that day, their encounters became more frequent. Martha would often find Alex outside when she was gardening, and he would come over to chat. Their conversations gradually grew longer and more personal. They talked about everything from gardening and books to their families and future aspirations. Martha was struck by how mature and thoughtful Alex was for his age, and she found herself opening up to him in a way she hadn't with anyone in years. It wasn't long before their interactions took on a different tone. There was a certain energy between them, a subtle tension that neither of them acknowledged but both felt. Martha began to look forward to their conversations, anticipating the moments when she could see him again. She started paying more attention to her appearance, choosing her clothes more carefully and spending extra time on her makeup and hair before heading outside. It was as if she had suddenly awakened from a long slumber, rediscovering a part of herself that had been dormant for years. Alex, for his part, was also captivated by Martha. He had always thought of her as an attractive woman, but now he saw her in a new light. She was sophisticated and elegant, with a quiet confidence that drew him in. Unlike the girls he had dated in college, Martha had a depth and wisdom that intrigued him. He admired her intelligence and grace, and the more they talked, the more he found himself thinking about her. Their conversations began to take on a flirtatious edge. Alex would compliment her on her appearance, and Martha would respond with a smile or a light touch on his arm. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a recognition that something was happening, even if neither of them was willing to admit it out loud. One afternoon, while they were talking in the garden, Alex noticed that Martha seemed distracted. He asked if something was bothering her, and to his surprise, she opened up about her feelings of loneliness and dissatisfaction in her marriage. She told him how Richard was often away, how their relationship had lost its spark, and how she sometimes felt like she was living in a gilded cage. Alex listened sympathetically, offering words of comfort and understanding. He told her that she deserved to be happy, to feel loved and appreciated, and that he couldn't understand how anyone could neglect someone as wonderful as her. Martha was touched by his words, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly seen and heard. She thanked him for his kindness and admitted that she felt a connection with him that she hadn't felt with anyone in years. Alex hesitated for a moment, then confessed that he had been thinking about her a lot lately, more than he probably should. Martha looked at him, her heart racing, unsure of what to say. The tension between them was palpable, and in that moment, they both knew that they had crossed a line. After that day, things between Martha and Alex changed. Their interactions became more charged with emotion, and it wasn't long before they gave in to their feelings. It started with a kiss, one that was hesitant at first, but quickly became passionate as they both realized how much they had been holding back. The kiss led to more stolen moments, and soon they were meeting in secret whenever they could. Martha knew what they were doing was wrong, but she couldn't stop herself. The affair made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. She felt desired, cherished, and excited. The secrecy added to the thrill, and for a while she allowed herself to be swept away by the passion and excitement of it all. Alex was equally enthralled by the affair. He was head over heels for Martha, and the fact that their relationship was forbidden only made it more intoxicating. He found himself constantly thinking about her, wanting to be with her, and hating the moments when they had to be apart. He began to imagine a future where they could be together openly, without the need for secrecy and lies. However, beneath the surface of their passionate affair, there were already signs of trouble. Martha started to feel the weight of the deception she was living, torn between her desire for Alex and her responsibilities as a wife and mother. She knew that what they were doing was dangerous, that it could all come crashing down if they weren't careful. But she was in too deep to stop, unable to resist the pull of the emotion she hadn't felt in so long. Alex, too, was beginning to struggle with the reality of their situation. He wanted more from Martha than just stolen moments and secret meetings. He wanted to be with her fully, to have her all to himself, and the thought of her going home to her husband every night filled him with jealousy and frustration. He tried to push those feelings aside, telling himself that they were just temporary, but they continued to gnaw at him, growing stronger with each passing day. As the summer days lengthened and the oppressive heat began to weigh down on the small suburban neighborhood. The once exciting affair between Martha and Alex began to take on a darker tone. The initial thrill that had accompanied their forbidden romance started to wane, replaced by a sense of dread that seemed to permeate every secret encounter. What had begun as an exhilarating escape for both of them was now turning into a dangerous game that neither knew how to stop playing. Martha, who had once felt revitalized by the attention and affection she received from Alex, now found herself increasingly consumed by guilt and fear. The affair, which had initially offered her a sense of freedom and escape from her stifling marriage, was becoming a burden too heavy to bear. The constant lies, the furtive glances, and the ever-present threat of discovery weighed heavily on her conscience. She felt like she was living a double life, and the strain of maintaining the facade was beginning to take its toll. Martha's relationship with her husband, Richard, had become even more strained in recent months. Richard, ever the workaholic, was oblivious to the changes in his wife. He remained focused on his career, frequently traveling for business and often coming home late, exhausted and preoccupied. His indifference only deepened Martha's feelings of isolation and resentment, but now those emotions were tainted with the shame of her betrayal. Every time Richard kissed her goodnight or asked about her day, Martha had to fight the urge to pull away, knowing that she was deceiving him in the worst possible way. Their daughter, Lily, was also beginning to notice the tension between her parents. Although she was busy with her own life, preparing for her final year of high school and spending time with friends, Lily couldn't help but sense that something was amiss. The once warm and loving home she had grown up in now felt cold and distant, and she often caught her mother staring off into space with a troubled expression. When Lily asked Martha if everything was all right, her mother would force a smile and assure her that everything was fine, but Lily wasn't convinced. Meanwhile, Alex was growing increasingly impatient and frustrated. The initial excitement of the affair had been intoxicating for him, but as time went on, his feelings for Martha deepened into something far more intense. He had fallen in love with her truly, madly, and completely. But his love was not the gentle, nurturing kind. It was possessive and all-consuming. He couldn't stand the thought of Martha being with anyone else, least of all her husband, Richard. The idea that she would go home to Richard every night, that she would share a bed with him, filled Alex with a burning jealousy that he struggled to contain. Alex began to push Martha for more. He wanted her to leave Richard, to end her marriage and be with him openly. He fantasized about a life where they could be together without hiding, where they could start fresh, away from the judgmental eyes of the neighborhood. He envisioned them moving to a new city, where no one knew their past, and where they could build a life together as a couple. But every time he brought up the subject, Martha would evade the conversation, making excuses or changing the topic. She was unwilling or unable to give him the answers he so desperately wanted. Martha knew that she was in a precarious situation. She had come to care for Alex deeply, but she was also acutely aware of the consequences if their affair were to be exposed. She could lose everything: her husband, her daughter, her reputation. The thought of Lily finding out about her infidelity was particularly painful. Martha couldn't bear the idea of her daughter looking at her with disappointment or, worse, disgust. And yet, she couldn't seem to bring herself to end the affair, no matter how much she knew she should. Alex had become her escape, her solace in a world that felt increasingly suffocating. As the weeks went by, Alex's behavior grew more erratic. He became more demanding, more possessive, and more controlling. He would send Martha dozens of messages a day, asking where she was, what she was doing, and whom she was with. He would call her repeatedly, even when he knew she was at home with her family. If she didn't respond immediately, he would become agitated and accuse her of avoiding him. When they met in person, their conversations often turned into arguments, with Alex pressuring her to make a decision about their future. Martha tried to reason with Alex, to explain that it wasn't as simple as just leaving Richard. She had built a life with her husband, and she couldn't just walk away from it. She also worried about the practicalities. How would she support herself? Where would she go? And what about Lily? She couldn't disrupt her daughter's life, especially not during such a critical time in her education. But Alex refused to listen. He was blinded by his obsession with Martha and couldn't understand why she wouldn't just leave everything behind to be with him. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, Alex showed up unannounced at Martha's house. Richard was out of town on a business trip, and Lily was staying with a friend for the night. Martha was alone, and when she heard the doorbell ring, she was surprised to find Alex standing on her doorstep. He looked disheveled, his hair tousled and his clothes wrinkled, as if he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were wild, and there was a desperation in his voice that scared her. "Martha, we need to talk," he said, pushing past her into the house before she could protest. Martha tried to calm him down, but Alex was insistent. He told her that he couldn't go on like this, that he needed to know where they stood. He demanded that she make a choice: either she left Richard and committed to being with him, or they ended things right then and there. Martha, overwhelmed and frightened by his intensity, begged him to give her more time, to be patient. But Alex was beyond reasoning. He grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her as he pleaded with her to choose him, to leave her old life behind and start a new one with him. Martha was terrified. She had never seen Alex like this before, so unhinged and desperate. She tried to pull away from him, but he wouldn't let go. In that moment, she realized just how dangerous the situation had become. She had thought she could control the affair, that she could keep it separate from the rest of her life, but she had been wrong. Alex was unraveling, and she didn't know how to stop it. After what felt like an eternity, Alex finally let go of her and collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. He apologized, saying that he didn't mean to scare her, that he was just so in love with her that it was driving him crazy. He told her that he couldn't stand the thought of losing her, that he needed her in his life. Martha, still shaken, tried to comfort him, but she knew that something had to change. She couldn't keep living like this, with the constant fear of discovery and the mounting pressure from Alex. The next day, Martha made a decision. She couldn't continue the affair, not like this. It had become too dangerous, too consuming. She needed to end it before things spiraled further out of control. She arranged to meet Alex at a secluded park, hoping that the neutral setting would help keep things calm. When she arrived at the park, Alex was already there, pacing nervously near a bench. He looked up as she approached, and the look in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. There was a mix of hope and fear in his expression, as if he knew what she was about to say, but was desperately hoping she would change her mind. "Alex, we need to talk," Martha began, trying to keep her voice steady. What we have, it can't continue. It's not fair to either of us. I care about you, but I can't keep doing this. It's tearing me apart, and it's not healthy for you either." Alex's face fell, and for a moment, he just stared at her, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then, slowly, his expression hardened. "So that's it," he said, his voice cold. "You're just going to throw me away, like I never meant anything to you." Martha shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "No, Alex, it's not like that. You do mean something to me, but it's not right. We're hurting ourselves and everyone around us. I can't leave Richard, and I can't keep lying to him. We have to stop." Alex took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "So you're choosing him over me? After everything we've been through, after everything I've done for you, you're just going to go back to your perfect little life and pretend I never existed?" Martha took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen Alex like this, so angry, so betrayed. She tried to reach out to him, to reassure him, but he slapped her hand away. "I'm not going to let you do this," he said, his voice rising. "You can't just walk away from me. I won't let you." Martha's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined that things would escalate to this point. She had thought she could end the affair quietly, that Alex would understand, but she had underestimated the depth of his feelings and his instability. "Alex, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "This isn't the way. We need to end this for both our sakes. You'll move on. You'll find someone else, someone who can give you what you need. But it can't be me." Alex's expression darkened, and for a moment, Martha thought he might lash out. But then, without warning, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the park, her heart pounding in her chest. For the next few days, Martha lived in a state of constant anxiety. She didn't hear from Alex, but she knew he was still out there, and she feared what he might do. She tried to go about her life as usual, but the guilt and fear weighed heavily on her. She avoided Richard as much as possible, unable to look him in the eye without feeling the crushing weight of her betrayal. Lily, too, noticed her mother's distress, but when she asked what was wrong, Martha brushed her off, saying she was just tired. But the tension in the Bennett household continued to build. Martha couldn't escape the feeling that something terrible was about to happen, that her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around her. And she was right. One evening, just as the sun was setting, the doorbell rang. Martha's heart skipped a beat as she went to answer it, a sense of dread settling over her. When she opened the door, she found herself face to face with Alex. He looked disheveled and desperate, his eyes wild and his hands trembling. "Alex, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tense. "I've been thinking, and I can't let you go. I won't let you go." Martha felt a chill run down her spine. She tried to remain calm, but the fear was evident in her voice. "Alex, you need to leave. This isn't the time or place." But Alex didn't listen. He pushed past her into the house, his eyes darting around as if searching for something. "Where's Richard?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "He's not here," Martha said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But you need to go. Please, Alex, don't do this." Alex turned to face her, and for a moment his expression softened. "Martha, I love you. I can't lose you. Don't you see? We're meant to be together." Martha shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, Alex, we're not. This has to end. You have to leave." But Alex wasn't listening. He stepped closer, reaching out to touch her face. "You're mine, Martha. You belong with me." Martha tried to pull away, but Alex grabbed her arm, holding her tightly. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice filled with determination. "Not until you admit that you love me." Martha struggled against his grip, panic rising in her chest. "Alex, please let me go." The aftermath of the confrontation between Alex and Richard left Martha in a state of shock and disbelief. The once stable and predictable life she had known was now a chaotic whirlwind of emotions, fear, and uncertainty. The tension that had been brewing for weeks had finally exploded, and there was no going back. What had once been a clandestine affair had now become a destructive force, tearing apart the lives of everyone involved. In the days following the violent encounter, Richard was seething with anger and confusion. He had been blindsided by the revelation that his wife, the woman he thought he knew so well, had been having an affair with a younger man. The image of Alex attacking him, fueled by a desperate and twisted love for Martha, haunted him. Richard couldn't understand how things had gotten so out of control. He had always prided himself on being a rational, level-headed person, but now his world had been turned upside down, and he didn't know how to make sense of it. Richard's immediate reaction was to confront Martha. He demanded answers, unable to comprehend how she could betray him so completely. In their first conversation after the incident, the air was thick with tension. They sat in the living room, the scene of the previous night's chaos, the room still bearing the marks of the struggle, overturned furniture, broken glass, and a heavy silence that seemed to press down on them both. "Martha," Richard began, his voice strained with the effort to keep his emotions in check. "I need to know why. Why did you do this? How long has this been going on?" Martha, her face pale and eyes red from crying, couldn't meet his gaze. She had known this moment was inevitable, but it didn't make it any easier. "Richard, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you." Richard slammed his hand down on the coffee table, making Martha flinch. "Sorry? Is that all you have to say? Sorry doesn't even begin to cover it, Martha. I want to know why. Why him? Why now?" Martha's tears began to flow freely as she struggled to find the words to explain herself. "I don't know. It just happened. I was lonely, Richard. You were always working, always away, and I felt so lost. And then Alex. He paid attention to me, made me feel alive again. I know it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself." Richard's expression was a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Lonely? You think that's an excuse? We've been married for over 20 years, Martha. You couldn't have just talked to me? Instead, you go off and have an affair with some kid." Martha shook her head, trying to make him understand. It wasn't just about being lonely, Richard. It was about feeling invisible, feeling like I didn't matter anymore. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but it's the truth. I'm not trying to justify it, but that's how I felt. Richard stood up, pacing the room as he tried to process what she was saying. So what? I wasn't enough for you anymore. You thought you'd just go find someone else to make you feel better. And what about Lily? Did you even think about what this would do to her? The mention of their daughter made Martha's heart ache with guilt. Of course I thought about Lily. I never wanted her to find out. That's why I tried to keep everything separate, why I didn't leave you. I didn't leave you. I didn't want to destroy our family. Richard's laugh was bitter. Well, congratulations, Martha. You've done a great job of that anyway. The conversation ended with Richard storming out of the house, leaving Martha alone with her thoughts. She knew that she had shattered the trust that had been the foundation of their marriage, and she wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. The guilt was overwhelming, but so was the sense of inevitability. Deep down, Martha had known for some time that her marriage was crumbling, even before the affair began. But she hadn't had the courage to face it, and now it seemed she had no choice. For the next few days, the household was tense and silent. Richard barely spoke to Martha, only communicating with her when absolutely necessary. He spent most of his time in his home office or out of the house entirely, avoiding any prolonged interaction. Lily, sensing the growing rift between her parents, grew more withdrawn, her usually bubbly personality dimmed by the tension in the air. She knew something was wrong, but neither of her parents would tell her what was going on. Martha could see the worry in her daughter's eyes, but she didn't know how to comfort her without revealing the ugly truth. Martha felt trapped in a situation of her own making, unable to see a way out. She knew that the affair with Alex had been a mistake, a dangerous, reckless mistake, but now she was paying the price for her actions. She couldn't go back in time and undo what had been done, and she wasn't sure how to move forward. One evening, Richard finally broke the silence. He had been drinking, something he rarely did, and Martha could tell that he was struggling to keep his emotions in check. He sat down at the kitchen table, where Martha was cleaning up after dinner, and motioned for her to sit down. "We need to talk about what happens next," Richard said, his voice low and strained. Martha's heart sank. She had been dreading this conversation, but she knew it was inevitable. "I know," she replied quietly, sitting down across from him. Richard took a deep breath, staring at the table as he spoke. "I don't know if I can forgive you for what you've done, Martha. I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were. But I also don't want to throw away everything we've built together, especially for Lily's sake." Martha nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me, Richard. I just want to find a way to move forward, whatever that means." Richard looked up at her, his expression weary. "I don't know what that looks like yet, but I think we need some time apart to figure things out. I'll stay with a friend for a while, give us both some space." Martha's heart ached at the thought of Richard leaving, but she knew it was the right decision. They both needed time to process everything that had happened, to decide if their marriage could be salvaged. "Okay," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I think that's a good idea." The next day, Richard packed a bag and left the house. He didn't say goodbye to Martha, only leaving a brief note for Lily, explaining that he needed to go away for a while for work. Martha watched from the window as he drove away, feeling a deep sense of loss and regret. She knew that this might be the beginning of the end for their marriage, but she also knew that they needed this time apart to figure out if there was anything left to save. As the days turned into weeks, Martha tried to keep herself busy, throwing herself into household tasks and taking long walks to clear her mind. She avoided Alex, who had made several attempts to contact her after the incident with Richard. She ignored his calls and messages, knowing that any further interaction with him would only make things worse. She needed to distance herself from him, to break free from the hold he had on her, but it wasn't easy. Alex had become an addiction, a dangerous escape from her problems, and letting go of that was harder than she had anticipated. Lily, too, was struggling with her parents' separation. She asked Martha repeatedly where her father was, why he had left so suddenly, and when he would be coming back. Martha tried to reassure her, telling her that everything would be okay, but she could see the doubt in her daughter's eyes. Lily was smart, too smart for her own good, and she knew that something more was going on than what her mother was telling her. The tension in the house was palpable, and it was taking a toll on both of them. One afternoon, as Martha was sitting in the living room, trying to read a book to distract herself, she heard a knock on the door. Her heart skipped a beat, fearing it might be Alex again. But when she opened the door, she found herself face to face with Detective Jameson, the local police officer who had come to investigate the disturbance the night of the fight. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, tipping his hat slightly in greeting. "I was hoping we could have a word." Martha's stomach churned with anxiety, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Of course, Detective. Please come in." Jameson stepped inside, glancing around the house as if assessing the situation. "I wanted to check in with you, see how you're doing after what happened." Martha nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm managing. It's been difficult, but we're getting by." The detective studied her for a moment, as if trying to gauge whether she was telling the truth. "I understand that your husband has left the house." "Yes," Martha replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He needed some time away. We're trying to figure things out."